So I've cut my heavyweight chipboard down. I have two pieces measuring 5 inches by 9 inches, and the spine is 2 inches by 9 inches. Now I'm applying some Fabri-Tac glue, or you could use gloss gel. You could also use Elmer's glue, Mod Podge, and you'll just want to make sure that it's working. I'm kind of struggling with the Fabri-Tac bottle here. I think some of it might have gotten dried out at the nozzle, and so I'm just having a little trouble getting the glue out. But as long as you can get the glue out and onto the chipboard, you'll be doing fine. If you do not have a piece of heavyweight chipboard, which is a 50 point as the thickness of a penny, and maybe you want to do something a little thinner, more bendy, you could use a manila folder. You could use a cereal box. There are other options. I wanted mine to be a hardbound book with a hard cover, so that's why I'm using the heavyweight chipboard. So I'm having a little difficulty getting the glue out. So I thought, well, maybe if I can stick this pin in here, kind of wiggle it around, maybe we can have a little more luck getting the glue out. I know the glue bottle, it doesn't have a whole lot of glue in there. And I think there's a dried piece that keeps coming up to the top. Just one of those things with glue bottles, huh? So it might be better to actually take the lid off. I think I'm just going to take the lid off, use the popsicle stick, and just kind of go from there. Kind of spread it on thick, because you want a nice thick layer of glue evenly spread. Okay. And then you just lay your fabric down over it, and then just kind of press it down a little bit so that your fabric will adhere to the chipboard. So this is the first part of the process, where I'm just going to be continuing with applying the glue and putting the fabric down over it. And I might have to just kind of adjust it, move it around a little bit until it gets on there like I want it, so everything's straight and not crooked.
You're making him pull.
Mm-hmm. So this is a piece of fabric, and I took a piece of chiffon, a piece of muslin fabric, and then had some old piano scroll paper, and I just put that under the sewing machine and sewed it just kind of around the edges. I did a little bit of a straight stitch, a little bit of a zigzag stitch, And now I want to adhere it to the spine. So this is going to cover up the middle part of my book, which is the spine. I also had taken a piece of lace and cut it to measure the width of the front cover and sewed it from the back side. You could also sew the lace from the front side so that the ends are showing up on the front cover. I did not want mine to show up on the front cover or on the front of the cover, so I sewed it from behind. That way you see it dangling, but you don't see the stitching and the ends of the lace on the front. But either way would look great. So now I'm mixing my plaster of Paris. You'll want to mix 2 parts plaster, 1 part water. And since I'm only needing a little bit, I'm measuring with a tablespoon, 1 tablespoon water, 2 tablespoons plaster. I've got 1 tablespoon of plaster in here right now, and I'm just going to mix that up. See how that thickens, and then I'll go ahead and add the other tablespoon of plaster. Stir it around real good. You want to try to get all the lumps out, and then you want to try to go ahead and use it up because, in about 10 to 15 minutes it starts setting and getting hard. So I want to apply this on where it's kind of liquidy. It's not really thin and watery. It does have some thickness to it, as you can start to see where I'm mixing in the second tablespoon. It's starting to get a little thicker consistency. So you want to get it to the consistency of like ice cream, and then just start dropping it on the parts of the cover where you want it to be. And you'll see where I put mine at. I want to put a little bit on the spine, a little bit on the cover, maybe around the edges, a few little splotches on the middle of the front and back cover. And, I'm just going to apply it with the popsicle stick. You might also want to do this in a cup that you don't plan on using for food unless you're going to wash it out really well. Another thing is you do not want to wash out your container or utensil in the sink because the plaster will harden in the sink. So I usually, if I have any excess, I just kind of scrape it out and put it in the trash can, wipe it out real good with a napkin, and then that way everything gets thrown away. And then if you want to reuse your container, you can, and it won't have any of the plaster in it. It will all be wiped out. I have also let it harden and then scrape it out and throw it in the trash can as well. You could also repurpose the pieces after it hardens and you scrape it out. You could repurpose those pieces. So that just kind of gives you some ideas there. So I want to scrape a little bit on the edge, not on all 4 of the edges, but just a little bit, enough to give it a little bit of an old look. The collection that I'm calling this particular project is Reminisce. It coordinates with the paper collection or the digital junk journal kit that I designed. And so we're going for kind of an old look, old wallpaper, old walls, just kind of what you would think about, from an old house, lots of memories, and you reminisce about your family and, our ancestors. And so I just kind of think about that. So So that's kind of what is inspiring me to put the plaster kind of around the edges. And then of course once I do this, then I'm going to let it dry before moving on to the next step. So now that we've let our plaster dry, I'm going to add something to the spine of the book. So I'm taking a piece of muslin fabric and I just folded it in half and then cutting, lengthwise down the middle of it. And what I'm going to do is add a couple of buttons to it, sew on the buttons. So I'm just kind of measuring it, making sure what the length is that I want it to be, because I don't want it to cover up all of the paper and the plaster. I want some of that to show up around it. So I've got that cut. And I thought I would add some of this black material. So I'm just going to cut it so that it will peek out a little bit around all the sides behind the white piece of material that we just cut. And you can just measure off what you want to and just cut it. And I'm just kind of distressing up the edge a little bit just by kind of tearing at it, getting it to unravel some so that it looks worn like the other edges do. And so I have some, it's actually cross-stitching thread. My grandmother's birthstone is peridot, and this was the closest color that I could find to it. So I've got a needle here with it's not a very small loop, it's a little thicker, a little wider so that I could fit all the strands of this thread in it. Usually your cross-stitching thread has 6 strands in it. And so I'm just going to use all 6 of them. That way I don't have to keep going in and out of the buttonholes. I can just go, in and out just the one time on each of them, and then it'll be done and it will be secured on there. So this is an old photograph, and I've got some vintage piano scroll paper. This is a picture of my grandmother and her dad, and her oldest daughter, which is my aunt, and then my grandmother's father-in-law. So I want to, put all these old photos in this book, but I want to put it in a protective case. So whatever protective material that you have, this is actually some thin acetate that I think some stickers came in, or a pack of flowers. And so I'm just going to put it in there and then fold down the edges, and then I'm kind of wrapping the piano scroll paper over that, and I'm gonna, I'm creasing it, and then I'm going to take some more of that peridot thread and do a little cross stitching on it. It will adhere it all together, and then as well as add, just an interesting point to our focal point of our book cover here. And so I'm tying a knot at the end. And I'm going to make some small X's. This is a book that I'm making to put old pictures in, whether they're originals or scans. And it's just going to be a family album that shows our generations. And, our family has come from all over. And, my great-grandfather is from Ireland. He's, Irish descendant. My great-grandmother is Dutch. And then of course they moved to Louisiana, and my grandmother got married, to a Louisiana man. So we're kind of all spread out. And so it's nice to have these pictures to document in the book, to keep these memories, write down some stories, and, it can be a book to cherish, forever, and to pass down from generation to generation. So I've made the 3 X's. Now I'm going to make some French knots. So you pull your thread through, and you want to have it tight, and then you make a knot that's going to be tight against the paper, and then you're going to go in a hole next to the one you just did. You could go into the same hole. I like to play it safe and go in right next to it. So that way it gives, I guess, a less of a chance for that French knot to slip through. So I'm going to do a few, I think about 3 of these French knots. It just adds, some other points of interest onto this. So I'm going to add one more X at the bottom, and then that's going to finish the stitching for this. And then I'll finish adhering, the actual protective case onto the paper, and then adhere it to the book cover. So I'm using a kind of like a little palette knife. Really, it's a bone folder, used to, kind of fold and crease your paper. So it's just what I had on hand, but I've dipped it in some gloss gel and just applied a thin layer. And then now I'm just pressing it down so that there won't be any like lumps and stuff. Just want to smooth it all out so it dries flat. And now I'm deciding, what else I might want to add. Maybe some other strips of fabric on here. Before I finish deciding how I want to finish the book cover, I'm going to go ahead and glue down what we made to go on our spine, because I want to see how much, maybe how much space that's going to take, to where do I need to place my picture at on the front cover. So it just kind of helps me to go ahead and have this part done. So I'm just going to glue that down, and then I'll finish up the front cover. Sometimes I like to just play around with it and figure out where I want to put stuff at. And then sometimes I think, well, let me just go ahead and glue down what I know, where I want it to go. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I'm gluing it down. I can always come back and add more to the front cover later as maybe I get some more ideas rolling around in my head. You can always come back and add more. So I'm just going to go ahead and glue down what I have.